Welcome, everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On Instagram, follow the account at GLR Reading. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. And on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we will be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect with you on social media. So on Instagram, follow the account at GLR Reading. On Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. And on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. The webinar will begin in just a second, and it will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. Okay, once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I will be behind the scenes helping to produce this webinar. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure to select panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last 20 to 30 minutes to respond to the questions you post during the discussion. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed to all who registered. And lastly, we will be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during the Q&A portion and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement at the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Lastly, before we start, I would just like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars. Next week on February 23rd at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we continue the conversation on parents. In this session, co-hosted with our partners at Family Engagement Lab, we will discuss how parents are eager to address learning loss, how they are taking up their role as essential partners, and lessons from the field. March 2nd at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we will highlight the community schools movement and how it is poised to play a central role in accelerating learning and learning loss recovery. Next month's Crucible of Practice session is scheduled for March 9th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. In this GLR Network peer-to-peer learning session, we will evaluate the very impressive work of Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania, and how they are building a community of readers. And finally, on March 9th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we will focus on state strategies to implement high-dosage tutoring. We'll be sure to add links in the chat box for more information and registration for these upcoming learning opportunities. Joining you now is Yoli Flores, Chief Learning Officer for the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra, and welcome. And thank you all for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar, The Power of Parents, Supporting and Equipping Parents to Lead Change. As many of you know, the Campaign for Grade Level Reading has always recognized that parents are central to achieving early school success for more children from economically challenged families. That is why we have bet big on parents. We believe deeply that parents are co-producers of good outcomes for their children and that they are essential partners in every sector that touches or plays a role in their children's lives. Early on, the campaign introduced its approach toward supporting parent success. And you'll see in the next slide how we think about that. We see incredible power and promise in helping parents envision bold goals for their children, in supporting them in achieving these goals, and then joining parents in marking progress and celebrating success. A key piece of how we support parents in achieving their goals for their children is honoring their role as powerful leaders for their kids, which requires that we create spaces for them to lead, that we support and equip them with information, skills, capacities, and resources to take up their power, and that we take their lead in crafting solutions to what will help them and their children succeed, rather than pretend that we have all the answers or that we know better. This session will help us explore the topic of parent power and how efforts to support and equip parents at the local and national level, in rural and urban settings, and across sectors can yield a powerful social movement to ensure more hopeful futures for more children. With that, let me introduce and welcome our moderator and our panelists who will lead this learning conversation. Our moderator today is my friend and colleague, Ritika Sharma Kurup. Ritika is Senior Director of Learning and Activation at Strive Together, where she leads the organizational strategy to gather and share learning, tools, and resources to support better, more equitable outcomes for children. Previously, Ritika led the local campaign for grade level reading in Dayton, Ohio. We're so honored to welcome her back home for this session to serve as our moderator. And now our presenters. And this is in alphabetical order. First up is Alex Cortez. Alex is managing partner in the education portfolio at New Profit, a Boston-based national venture philanthropy. Alex has spent 16 years in the nonprofit sector, including various roles with the KIPP network of nonprofit public charter schools, and as a nonprofit consultant with the Bridgespan Group. He serves on a number of nonprofit boards, as well as the Massachusetts State Board of Higher Education. So welcome, Alex. Seth Litt. Seth is the Executive Director of Parent Revolution, whose mission is to ensure that families, especially those from historically underserved communities, can use their power to secure an excellent public education for their children in their community, and all children in California. Seth was previously a public school principal in the Bronx, where he led the turnaround of a middle school and founded a high school for systems involved youth. So welcome, Seth. Next is Amy Murchison. Amy is program coordinator for the Early Care and Education Program at the Aroostook County Action Program in Aroostook County, Maine. Amy oversees the implementation of the Family Engagement and Mental Health Head Start program performance standards and works collaboratively with the family coaching team at ACAP. Amy continues to be part of the team that oversees the transition to engaging families from a whole family approach at ACAP. Welcome, Amy. Next is Carrie Rodriguez on the next slide. Carrie is Matthew, Miles, and David's mom, and the founding president of the National Parents Union. Called arguably the most successful parent organizer in education advocacy today, her outstanding commitment to social, economic, and educational equity for children and families spans decades. Welcome, Carrie. And finally, Lakeisha Young. Lakeisha Young is co-founder and CEO of the Oakland Reach, a parent-run organization founded to make the powerless parent powerful. The Oakland Reach created the citywide virtual hub to support families' economic survival and their children's educational success. The hub launched in June of 2020. It serves over 350 families and is delivering real academic gains. The hub, which we all look forward to hearing more about, has been featured on CNN, on KQED, the BBC, Univision, and more. And Lakeisha regularly consults with cities about replicating this work. Welcome, Lakeisha. Our moderator, Ritika, will take it from here. I just want to say welcome, Ritika. Thank you for joining us and for moderating. And welcome back to the campaign for this session. I'll hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Yoli. And good afternoon, everybody. I am so excited to be here amongst friends I have known for years and new friends that we're going to make today. Like Yuli said, that I led the campaign for Montgomery County, Ohio for several years from the beginning, and now am at Strive Together, and I'm so excited to continue this partnership. So welcome again, and I am truly excited and humbled by the opportunity to have today's discussion, which I believe is one of the most critical questions for all of us in the social sector. How do we lead and support parents in taking up their power and get out of their way? So today's learning question is really going to be focused on that. How should we be supporting and equipping parents who are our children's strongest advocates in leading the change agenda? For too long, we in the sector have limited sometimes parent power to just informing and consulting, not leading the change. But now the conversation is changing. Many people are engaging and leading the path to figuring out together how we do this differently. Because at the end of the day, parents are their children's first teacher and the best advocates. And I'm so excited to have today's panel, which is a group of thoughtful, bold, and intentional leaders who are paving the way for parents to lead this change agenda. So without further ado, I'm going to invite my panelists to come back on camera, and we will start with Seth, and each panelist will have 1 to 2 minutes to share a little bit about their organization and how they're leading this work, and then we'll have opportunity to go in deeper questions.
Hey all, thanks for being here. I'm Seth Litt. I am the Executive Director of Parents Revolution. When we think of parent power, we sort of ask ourselves the question, can parents wake up in the morning and do things to make sure their kids get a good education? And for lots of parents, that's true. They can do lots of things. They can walk into their child's school and be listened to. They can go to parent-teacher conferences or an IEP meeting and be listened to. And if, God forbid, they have to pick up the phone and call the superintendent or the mayor, someone listens to them. But we know that for lots of parents, that isn't true, especially Black and Latino parents, parents whose children have disabilities, parents who don't speak English. And so we think about how to help parents use their power in all of those places. And I think what's important for today's conversation is that lots of people on this webinar are not going to be organizing parents to change the system at its highest levels, to participate in impact litigation or politics, or to even work on policy campaigns. But there's still questions about how those daily spaces are organized so that parents can use their power rather than being resistant to parent power. And so I bring that perspective as a former principal, that you can do all the daily things in school in ways that make it very hard for parents to fight for their kids, or you can sort of move to the side of parents and make it so that parents can translate their love into actions that actually help their children's education. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Seth. Keisha?
I'm sorry, and we're just doing our first 1 minute intro, right?
Yes.
This
yes.
is not okay, because I'm ready. Just making sure. So yeah, I'll keep it brief. I'm Lakeisha Young, co-founder and CEO of the Oakland Reach. I'm also a mom of 3. My oldest is heading to college this year. So how she survived her senior year remotely and going to college she's my shero. The Oakland Reach, we're parent-led and we're parent-run, right? And this is really all about, not just about families wanting a better education for their kids, because I would say 100% of families we talked about want better for their kids, but it's about really giving them the tools and really coming together as a community to really change that. I'm saying that at the really basic levels, because I think the words are really more in the solutions we create versus the things we say. But this is really about how do Black and brown families together, right, really shift that. And just if people don't know, I am the Oakland Reach. We are in Oakland, California, which is obviously such a central place and has such a historical place when it comes to social justice and fighting for the rights of folks. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'm looking forward to talking about what parent power really looks like, feels like, and what folks need in this moment, in the moments to come. But thank you for having me, and that's who I am.
Thank you, Keisha. Amy, let's go to you.
Hello, thank you all so much for being here and having me be here. I work at the Aroostook County Action Program in Aroostook County, Maine. It's very rural, small communities. And we really take on the approach of serving the whole family in our early care and education program, which includes Head Start, Early Head Start, childcare, and then we also serve children who have disabilities in our program. And we really value that, families are complicated and that no one cookie cutter works for one family. We really try to be flexible and meet families where they're at and really hope to support them in being their child's first teacher and that they are the experts on their life and their children's lives.
Thank you, Amy. Carrie, would you like to share?
Hi, everybody. I'm Carrie. And I always lead that I'm Matthew, Miles, and David's mom. You actually may see some of them bouncing around behind me because it's February vacation here in Massachusetts. So we are keeping it real. I have a second, third, and seventh grader. And here in Massachusetts, I founded Massachusetts Parents United when my now seventh grader was a first grader. And we were able to grow that organization into the largest parent advocacy organization here in Massachusetts, based off of the fear and the deep love of one scared mom just talking to some other mamas here in Massachusetts. But that fierce love can change the world. And what we started doing is meeting up in coffee shops and starting to build our power and organizing brick by brick. And that brought us to connecting with other organizations across the country who are also doing this powerful work. Powerful parents are all over the country. There are pockets of parent power all across this nation. And a bunch of us came together last January, in January of 2020, down in New Orleans, and decided that together we would form the National Parents Union. So now we're about 500 of the nation's top advocacy organizations, activists, agitators, mamas on the move, fighting for justice for our kids, not just educationally, but economically, trying to make sure our streets are safe so that our babies can actually get to the school building as well. You can find us in all 50 states, DC and Puerto Rico. We're reaching about 15 million families across the country. And we're authentically and democratically run by parents. And we do this together as a group. The National Parents Council is our guiding organization. Some of the 16 of the fiercest mamas I've ever met coming together to make decisions around what we take on and what issues we battle and what campaigns we decide to embrace. And we all do this from a place of deep love and deep faith that we can make this world a better place for our babies. So glad to be their ambassador here today and excited to join the conversation.
Thank you, Carrie. And last but not the least, Alex.
Good afternoon, or well, yeah, even in California, good afternoon. I work at New Profit. We are a philanthropy that works deeply with a small set of social entrepreneurs to really try to advance opportunity, advance justice, advance equity, and increasingly, and we're on our own journey to wrestle with this, increasingly supporting efforts to dismantle undemocratic systems of power. And that includes in education. And as everyone here has said, there's no one who better understands the needs of a child and loves a child than their parents. And yet so often education systems least value parents. And so we're exploring our own way for how we support efforts that inform and organize parents so they can exercise that innate power, be it individually or collectively, to drive and sustain change in the agenda that they set for their community, not well-intentioned outsiders with resources, which includes funders, which we'll talk more about. And I think we've seen that when parents are informed and organized, they can exercise that innate power as partners in the education of their children, where schools want that, or through out-of-school resources, exercising that innate power of choice, both the choice you make between schools and the myriad choices you make for your child within a school, by exercising the power of their collective voice on issue campaigns, and exercising the power of their vote through electoral activism.
Thank you, Alex. I am so excited to have this conversation with all of you. So for the audience, the structure is going to be, I'm going to engage in conversations with a couple of people, presenters at a time. Please keep your questions coming in the Q&A box because we want it to be a conversation and learning together. So please make sure that you're posting your questions in the Q&A box. Sometimes things get lost in the chat, and my friend Yoli is going to help me keep those straight. And with that, I'm going to invite Seth and Keisha in really having this conversation around local mobilizing efforts. So Seth and Keisha, you're both in large urban cities, and most recently you've been supporting and equipping parents to demand better for their kids during this difficult time of the pandemic with school closures, digital inequities, and overall hardship with the pandemic. Can you share a little bit of the highlight of the work that you've been leading, what you have been learning? And then, if you will, I'm really curious in how you differentiate between parent power and parent engagement. I see those terms getting thrown around, and so it'll be really good to hear your perspective around that.
You want me to go first, Seth?
You always have more interesting things.
Yeah. So give me some, I wanna step back a little bit and talk about this. I think I'll quickly say, I don't use the word parent engagement. I think I've been in conversations about the word parent engagement. I don't know if it's that interesting for this panel, for people to get caught up in words. I think ultimately it's sort of, what do you do on behalf of families? But for us, it's been primarily, we use the word advocacy, but let's talk about parent power, right? And I would say parent power for us is our hub, which I'll talk about in a second. We've seen firsthand, on the ground, that much of how advocacy has been playbooked, right, around parent power actually adds more burden to the most burdened families to push on systems that we believe kind of fake listen to families with like little or no results. I cannot tell you how many board meetings we've attended. We've provided Lyft rides, we provide food. We have introduced our families who have never been a part of that process, but yet and still all they can do is stand up in front of a podium in front of people who don't have to respond to them. And then if they are prepared to speak for 2 minutes, if too many people are speaking, then now they can only speak to one. And most people don't understand what it took for that mama or that grandmama to get to that space at that time on that night. And then they are diminished to a minute. And then guess what? If people don't want to listen to you, then they all of a sudden got to go to the bathroom, right? Then they get up from the dais and they go to the bathroom, and then they don't even hear a parent voice. It is absolutely appalling and ridiculous. And so for us, our only solution and our best solution was the hub. I call it parent power on steroids, right? It was us like taking we're in this pandemic, and this pandemic is labeled to be the most disastrous thing for most folks, but definitely for low-income Black and Brown communities. And it was our goal to make this actually a time that our families could do better than they ever did, than it being a time of despair. I want to note that again. We walked into this in times of hope, of like, how do we use this crisis to move our families to a better place than they've ever been in this system that we've been trying to navigate and fight and push and all of that, okay? So it was really around parents taking full agency over our children's education to both mitigate learning loss, but also to accelerate learning, right? Our goal was really to let's make sure our babies can read, And I think we did this in 5 distinct ways. And I'm sharing these 5 distinct ways because these ways come directly from what we hear from our families and what our families are saying. So number 1 is obviously academic. As part of the hub, especially in phase 1 of the hub, we provided almost like a full school. Our kids were in school Monday through Friday. They had about 3.5 hours of live instruction. Literacy was a huge focus for that. We had just run a campaign called Literacy for All that was really, really focused on making sure everybody in the house could read, not just the babies, but we got mamas and grandmamas that are graduating from these same schools in these same communities, and they're actually functioning illiterate. You are not going to shift any kind of communities around literacy if you're not paying attention to every single person in that house and making sure everybody in that house can read. So we really took that work and pulled that into the hub because we were already working with the district, but guess what? We already behind. We are so behind when it comes to educating our communities. So when we had the opportunity to build the hub, we then moved those principles of the science behind reading and put that right into the hub. And we'll talk in a minute about the results from that. But the first part of that was academic. Okay. And in the spring, there was a 35% attendance rate in the school district. We had an 83% attendance rate in our hub, which leads me to the second component, which was key, which is community, right? Community. Our families, everybody needs community. And I think we're respecting and appreciating that even more going through this pandemic. But again, I can talk to you about community, but what results are we putting into place and what solutions? So for us, every family had a family liaison. I call them like the educational social worker. That family liaison is making sure the kids, they're calling you, making sure your child's online. They are helping you get into email. Our households, many of our parents' households were not set up, not even remotely to move to distance learning, right? So we are teaching parents in real time while we're losing time on how to like click on a Zoom link and how to help navigate learning at home with their kids, right? So the family liaison is literally like the person who's got your back. They're helping you with the tactical things, but they're helping you with the emotional, mental, and psychological components of this as well. And I think that's super key. The other component that I feel is steeped in community is our Family Sustainability Center. And I want to name that all of this stuff is virtual. Okay, we call it the FSC. That's where parents go for resources and workshops that are both academic and socioeconomic. This hub is all about tending to the both academic and socioeconomic needs. We have seen as a parent education advocacy org that if we are not paying attention to the socioeconomic hardships that impacts families' ability to be involved in the academic component, we are missing a huge part of the pie. So because we got to build it the way it was supposed to be. So the FSC has a socioeconomic focus on it well. The third component is social. These kids won't remember, a lot of them, that they were in a pandemic. They're still kids and they are future leaders. So we wanted to make sure that whatever we designed was not this feeling of like, you're behind and you just need to stay online all day. So we made sure, we make sure that we introduce social enrichments. So we have kids taking, martial arts and cooking and, literacy classes based in their culture, creative writing, right? Art classes, like our kids are not getting this right now. And guess what? A lot of our kids weren't getting this stuff when they were in-person learning. So we really use this as an opportunity to bring the best of the best to our families, okay? And then number 4, okay, is technology. Obviously, you need technology when you're in the middle of a pandemic and you're focusing on distance learning. We made sure that every single family and every single kid had a computer, and every single household that did not have internet access had a hotspot. I do want to disclaimer this for a second. We do not believe that hotspots are connectivity, okay? So as the Oakland Reach, we are actually doing the work to think ahead around how do we do stuff like free broadband internet access? What does the advocacy look like around that? Because if you go into a household that had 1 iPad, now you incorporate 5 or 6 Chromebooks and then throw a little hotspot in there. Come on now, our parents are not going to win with something like that. So hotspots are an important part of the technology infrastructure parents have, but I will put them in the hardware category and not the connectivity one. We also brought on pretty much 5 days a week, business hours tech support. We just put a whole bunch of Chromebooks in people's houses that didn't have technology and then are telling them, win the day, seize the day. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to always provide the infrastructure and the support for families to be successful. So we made sure that there was tech support so that families could get that help. Because if a family needs support, that means a kid can't get online. that was literally what the results were, right? So the technology piece is huge. And then last but definitely not least is the socioeconomic, right? Which I mentioned before. At the end of our summer session, families receive stipends up to $500, right? We've run a relief fund. We've done an adopt a family in the Christmas time. We did relief. We are constantly figuring out ways to provide financial relief, connect our families to financial resources. Folks are out here struggling for real, having a hard time putting groceries in the refrigerator. And then they need to make sure that this baby, who this was going to be the baby to go to college, they got to make sure that child doesn't fall off track. So it is our responsibility to build the thing that we know our families need, right? And then let me just close out with these last two pieces. So those are the 5 components that I outlined that the hub was about. The results were phenomenal, okay? At the end of the 5 weeks of our full summer hub, okay, 60% of our K-2 students increased at least 2 or more reading levels on the district-wide reading assessment. I want to say that again, 60% of our K-2 students increased by 2 or more reading levels. 30% of our K-2 students increased by 3 or more reading levels. That is 5 weeks virtually. So I know a lot of people got issues with virtual learning. I know that there's some challenges around it, but the narrative that we do not talk about enough is that there are a lot of families who are finding more success in remote learning than they ever did in in-person learning, okay? And those families happen to be the low-income Black and brown families that everybody thinks that they want to speak on behalf in terms of open up the schools for those kids, okay? Talk to them first and ask them what they think. We had a 90% satisfaction rate for families, okay? But, and this is the last part I'm closing on. I just told you about the hub. The hub is great. The hub is doing great things in Oakland and we keep expanding. But we have a crisis in California, okay? Seth is down in LA. That's my buddy. He knows what's up and we got a crisis in the country. So while we're running that, we jumped into a lawsuit. So we are now a part of a one-of-a-kind lawsuit against the state of California, right? To hold them accountable for just this, you know, I have some choice words I want to use. So I'm not going to put the first P in the P I was going to use. I'm just going to say for this poor education, right, that our kids have been receiving even before the pandemic. And the reason why the Oakland Reach jumped onto this lawsuit is because we are not a do something organization. We're not going to be banging on your door, yelling at you, talking about do something. Those days are over. This was about do this. We've already created the thing that works. Now we need you to replicate it. You want to talk about parent power? Parent power is when parents are building the solutions and then holding the systems accountable for replicating. Now you have no excuse. I'm not asking you to be innovative. I'm not asking you to be creative, and I'm not asking you to care about our babies. But when we bring the things to you that work, I need you to figure out how to find the resources to replicate it. And that's kind of where we are. And I think that that is parent power. And I'm passing it to Seth. I hope, Seth, that was only 5 minutes.
It was awesome. I was trying not to unmute and say yes or amen at any moment in there because there was a lot of them. This is a really fun panel because I have a lot of respect and appreciation for the work all the other folks are doing. I actually start with that question about parent engagement and parent power, because I think I was the one that brought that up, and it's a reflection I have coming to this work from spending 12 years working in schools and 7 of those leading schools. And when I started leading this organization that already existed before I became its leader, I had a real moment of reflection, realizing that I had accidentally done sort of parent power a few times and created the conditions where parents could use their power. You know, because power is relative. You know, we all believe parents have power, but any of us, like I might have power to talk to my landlord, but I don't have power to talk to the president as an individual. And so it's important to think of it as relative. And maybe a few times as a principal, I accidentally created conditions where parents actually had decision-making power and oversight power. But often I was held accountable for parent satisfaction and parent engagement, and they're just different. And because this is, I think, a group where many people are sort of providing important services and running programs, I think it's important to think about where you're creating the conditions where parents are actually able to use their power and aren't just sort of being engaged. And engagement's good, but it's different, and it's important not to confuse the two. Lakeisha said something important about that question that I want to pick up on when you said sort of like words are dangerous. We get caught up in thinking about words. And I really agree with that. I think we see in education often that words lose their meaning and become very dangerous very quickly. You can think about differentiated instruction or learning styles, or even social emotional learning, that over time it becomes to mean everything and nothing. And it's very hard to provide the sort of quality and consistency that matters for children. And one of the words that is now very dangerous, I find, in California is this word stakeholders. And I think it starts from a good place of thinking that community, parents, educators, students should have a voice in their education and the education system. But folks expect that word stakeholder to do all of the work that the system refuses to do. So we and the families that are the leaders in our organization worked on a bill last year in the California legislature. California enacted landmark funding reform 5 or 6 years ago, which was intended to fund low-income students, foster youth, and English learners, and to go away from having sort of a local tax base for education. Well, it turns out a number of years later, they're actually funding districts, and districts use that money for whatever they want to. They don't actually have to spend the money on the kids it's meant for. And so we work with Dr. Shirley Weber, who is now the first Black Secretary of State of California. She was just appointed by the governor. She's a champion in the legislature. This bill had zero opposition in either house. It made it to the governor's desk, and our progressive Democratic governor vetoed it. And the bill essentially said, districts have to spend the money on kids. You can't roll it over and launder it and spend it on kids whose parents have plenty of resources. And so the governor promised he was going to get it done in some backroom deal this year in his veto message. We're with parents in meetings working on it. And we're hearing the governor's team say, well, stakeholders will hold the district and the county responsible. Stakeholders are going to make sure that this money is spent right. Stakeholders are going to make sure that this program is implemented with fidelity across the 1,000 schools of LAUSD. And I think we have to be careful that we don't accept the system saying we're not going to hold ourselves accountable. We're not actually going to make sure where the money goes. But we like this idea, the way it sounds, that families are going to do the work that a state with billions and billions of dollars and every lever of authority refuses to do or won't do. Quickly sort of take us through what we've been working on. So when the pandemic hit, we shifted and we engaged in a type of work we had never done before. We raised over $2 million and built, amongst community organizations, a network for emergency relief. And we provided direct cash to public school families in Los Angeles. We gave special preference to families who are undocumented, because at that moment when the pandemic first started, we knew that federal stimulus was going to leave out undocumented or mixed status families, but it was not just for families of that status. And we got cash in the hands of about 2,500 families to use for rent, medical care, food, whatever their families needed. We also stayed really close to the families that are the leaders in our organization, and a sort of different type of navigation work emerged from that. For years, in addition to our organizing work, we had helped families evaluate their school options and navigate that system, because the system's not meant for every family to be able to use the information to get a good school for their child. It's an opaque system. Some people pay consultants to do it. So we had done that sort of navigation work, but it was really clear that we were all of a sudden in a new world, and all these new systems that were springing up were not designed with low-income families in Los Angeles in mind. So whether it was seeking rent relief or being able to assert your rights with your landlord when there was an eviction moratorium, or whether it was being able to apply for various types of assistance or programs for your child, none of that information got to the communities we serve. And certainly none of the systems were set up for families to be able to navigate those. And so we did a lot of work with families to make that information available and for folks to be able to get more value from that system. I'll quote Lakeisha again when she talked about the system fake listening, and that is really true. I think it's one of the things we wrestle with, is to make sure that we are not asking families who are already asked to do more than wealthier white families are asked to do on a daily basis to get good conditions for their child, to then engage in organizing and advocacy campaigns just to be ignored. But the difference is in sort of May, when our families sort of got out of the immediate shock of COVID shutting everything down and said, yeah, like we need to get organized and work on systems change like we normally do. What was different is the system didn't even go through the motions of fake listening. The school board wasn't meeting. The school board went on vacation all summer without a plan for distance learning for the fall. No information for families. They weren't even holding remote meetings. They weren't taking calls with families. And so all of the normal activities and actions that our parent leaders might use in other situations were really shut down. There wasn't even the illusion that you could go speak to a school board meeting, a member, or work on a policy and maybe try to have some community oversight of that policy. And that really led us to this impact litigation lawsuit, which is different than the lawsuit Oakland Reach is involved in, but is focused in Los Angeles. And it really is actually focused on the MOUs between the teachers union and the district. Those are agreements that shape every aspect of how children are educated. They happen behind closed doors. Parents have no voice in them. And it really is where the power lies locally. And because of the politics in California and in Los Angeles, folks don't really talk about it. They don't want to get involved in it, and they certainly don't want to intervene in it. And so 9 plaintiffs who are public school families in Los Angeles, working with Pro Bono Council, are leading this work to look at how those decisions are made and what the impacts are on kids, and to try to get the courts to hold the system responsible for the discrete harm that they've caused on top of school shutdown by having an insufficient program, and to make sure that there are remedies for children that are tracked and that are accountable to someone outside the system. So over there.
Thank you, Seth. There are lots of comments in the chat and people engaging. So thank you, Keisha, for answering in real time. It is really encouraging to me and learning from both of you in how you are doing real system change work, because you're moving the practice on the ground forward and moving policy and holding accountability with the systems. So really impressive, and hopefully we can get into more conversation with the audience towards the end of the conversation. So thank you for sharing your perspectives and your amazing work. So Amy, I want to invite you to share a little bit. You are in a different setting in a rural town in Maine where poverty plays out just the same, and like urban cities. And there is lack of educational opportunity, which denies children a strong future. And I know you've been doing a lot of work in yielding power to families and bringing, supporting and equipping parents. And so wanted to see if you can share some tangible examples in how you and your organization are leading this work in a rural community.
Yes, thank you so much. And so several years ago, our Community Action Agency really took on the challenge to transform how we served all of our customers, including families with young children. And we really believe that linking families with resources such as SNAP benefits, health insurance, help with paying their rent is really important so that they can focus on their child's education or focus on their career goals. It's really hard to focus on those things when you're struggling just to pay the bills or keep food on the table. And so we really have worked very hard to really change how we're serving our customers. A whole family approach is about approaching families and looking at their whole family. So it may include children, extended family members, maybe mom's good friend or dad's good friend, and what's going on, and really asking families, what are your goals? What are your priorities? What's the priority for your family? Because our parents and our families, they're the experts on their lives. They know what they need. and it's about giving them the opportunity to voice that. And that happens with very open and honest and transparent relationships. We have family coaches who meet with our families regularly, and we really work hard on having those transparent, honest relationships, and really say, you're the experts on your lives. I'm here to support you, so that if you need heating assistance, I can support you through that appointment. Because obviously in Maine, it's very cold, and it's wintertime, and we're actually getting a really wonderful winter storm right now. Also within our agency, our governance structure is set up. Head Start has a long history of parents being part of what's called Policy Council. And so we have parent meetings at each of our centers, and they have representatives that represent those centers on our Policy Council. Our Policy Council meets once a month. It's very similar to a school board. And they review financial information. We have one of our financial analysts attend and explain the budget and where we're at in our budget year. We also share with families our attendance. We always strive to be at least 85% average attendance for the children that attend our program, and really talk with parents about why attendance in preschool is so very important. And then from Policy Council, we also have 2 seats on our board of directors. So our larger community action agency has representation of our customers from early care and education. So parents have that voice at our program level, but also at our agency level. And they also get to review agency financials, grants the agency may be applying for, and have that input at all levels of governance within our agency. Some really, I wouldn't say unique challenges, but certainly it's been very challenging in rural Maine. We have families who parents are in recovery. We certainly have been hit with opioid use, like many areas of the United States, and it's a very small, closed, tight-knit community. And unfortunately, everybody knows everybody's business. It's very small, everybody knows everybody. And oftentimes when someone has moved into recovery and is rebuilding their life, to get past that stigma in the community is really, really hard, and really linking families with that recovery community that has started to pop up here in Aroostook County, and really helping them find ways to find peers who have had success and found employment opportunities, educational opportunities, and supporting families so that they can be successful in their recovery process.
Thank you so much for sharing. I have a follow-up question, and I'm curious what your take is on this. So in the Strive Together network, we've been talking about shifting power to community. And one thing that we are trying to figure out how to support is how, when you say you have seats on your board and as voting members, what does that look like in terms of supporting those parents so that they feel that they can lean into their power in those spaces and not, feel tokenized? And so I wondered if you had some ideas on how that plays out in supporting parents to lean into that power at the board level, for example.
So I think there's a couple of ways we do that. I am available to support the parents. We have staff that at the center levels. We have a strong belief we hire parents, and we have found that parents are they're the best support for each other. And so oftentimes if we've had a parent who's been on our board for several years, they kind of mentor that newer board member coming on. And it's very challenging. It feels, I've had to present at board meetings as a staff member, and it's intimidating to me. So I can only imagine what that must feel like for a parent. And so we really try to provide that peer support and that staff support. We also, our Head Start director is also at all the board meetings, and she is also at all of our policy council meetings. So there's that familiar face within that meeting, so that the person or either parent, if they're there, they're not alone.
Thank you so much, Amy. There is definitely a lot to be learned from the model Head Start has with, parents have been, like, I think it was in our previous call, you were saying parents have been reviewing the financials, they've been making all these decisions, and everything has been working. So professionals sometimes fear and hold on to power, but nothing has fallen apart, and parents have been leading the work. So a really helpful perspective, and appreciate you sharing insights. And I see some questions popping up, and hope to circle back after we pull in Kerry and Alex into the conversation. From your perspective, Kerry, you have launched a national parents union like you shared, and Alex, you recently wrote a terrific piece on systems change and parent power. And I want to pull you into the conversation and see, in many ways, both of you are making this national call to action for parents to mobilize the change and lead the change agenda. And wondering, how do you see parents as equal partners, co-producers for good outcomes for children? Why is it necessary from your different seats that you sit in your roles, and how might we learn from what is already happening in communities?
So I guess I'll jump in first. To what Lakeisha and Seth were saying earlier about this notion of parent empowerment and how we have to have a call to action. Parents are already called to action. We are already powerful. We are already empowered. These are our children. It's just a question of disassembling a system that has been built basically to serve the wants of adults over the needs of children. And that's why so often I really feel like many of us are feeling like we bang our heads up against a wall, saying like there are really common sense things that we should be doing for kids that we're just not doing. When you're in the struggle, and when you're a mama that is just trying to make sure you've got a roof over your kid's head, that you're under an extraordinary amount of pressure just on a good day, on a non-pandemic day, and just dealing with life on life's terms, it can be very difficult and intimidating to then go in and have to advocate for your child when things are going wrong. Many of us are former students. I would say all of us are former students. And if you're a former student like I am, I was expelled from public high school. So when it comes to trusting the system and wanting to engage with a system that wanted nothing to do with me, I come in as a mama with my dukes up. And I think a lot of parents across the country are very skeptical about engaging with parents because there's been no restorative justice. There's been no acknowledgement of the deep trauma, the deep harm that has been done to communities. But then there's this expectation that we just step up and engage in systems that are based in white supremacy. And if we don't show up in ways that the system expects us to show up, basically on these terms of white supremacy, then we don't care. Then we're not doing enough. We're not engaging on their terms. And frankly, parents have had it. And that's why, when you have authentically led parent movements, and again, these pockets are all over the country where parents have come together, and sometimes they come together to fight for something that's very temporary, but sometimes they say, oh my gosh, this system is all, just completely screwed up, and we've got to fight. This is going to be a long-term fight to disassemble, generational institutional racism in our system. It's just not working for our kids. But however they show up, they don't have to be empowered. Frankly, they just have to be passionate. But there's a long fight to actually being heard. And what we try to do, we have three main goals in our organization. Number one is building solidarity. because every single one of us who are members of the National Parents Union know what it's like to feel that pain, that isolation, that you had failed your child, that you have educators surrounding your child who had given up on your kid. For me, it was sitting at the end of an IEP table, taking a look at educators. My kid was in kindergarten and saying, oh my God, these guys are already fed up with my kid. What am I going to do here? Feeling like you had no voice in the system, you had no power. It was the way it was, and it wasn't going to change for you. And that feeling of isolation, that feeling of desperation, that powerlessness can go either way. You can either go into your shell and say, oh my gosh, I've just failed my kid and there's no way I'm going to do this, or you can use it to try to generate change. And what we try to do is break people out of their isolation and say, Mama, you're not alone. There are other folks that have had to walk this path. Come along and walk with us. You don't have to bear this pain alone, that you're failing your kid or the system is failing your kid. And we bring them on that journey. Number two, parents that are already doing this work. And I love listening to my cousin, Lakeisha Young, whenever we're on a panel together, because what she speaks the truth. I just want to make sure that mamas like her across this nation that are doing this work are heard on the national level, because Lakeisha, what she does, she has been able to blossom. There are other mamas doing this work in neighborhoods across this nation that just need a little bit of support to figure out how to run a campaign, how to run a rally, how to write an op-ed, how to speak truth at a school committee member and make sure they put some respect on it. How to do that and build that backbone so that they can join and stand shoulder to shoulder with all of us. So building that professional development for a lot of these organizations and just saying, hey, this is how we figured out how to do it. Let me share it with you is our second goal here. Number three is making sure that we have a national voice in these conversations, because the fact of the matter is we don't have parents and families that have a united national voice that are speaking together saying, we're going to refocus our education conversation around our children. And it's going to mean different things to different people, but putting parents, the people who are closest to the pain, frankly, closer to the power, so that we can correct and disassemble these systems that are failing our children, is our mission here. And making sure that women across this nation, men, I always talk about the mamas because I'm led by a lot of mamas in my organization, but making sure that parents are able to speak their truth and to be collaborators and co-creators of legislation, of policy, of campaigns, of how money is spent, so that we actually get to the outcomes that we're seeking. That's our mission. And so the National Parents Union in this moment, we're standing together to make sure that parents like Lakeisha, parents like Bernita Bradley, parents like Christina Laster in San Diego, we've got parents across this country from sea to shining sea that deserve to be heard at these tables are being heard, and that they have the support and the solidarity of parents from across the country. Because if we need to roll up in Detroit, we need to roll up in San Diego, we need to roll up in New York City, they have a posse there to help them so that they feel supported, so they can speak that truth and they can get their ideas heard. And that's critically important in this moment. If we're truly going to have a reimagining of our education system, if we're going to have an equity infused educational recovery in this moment, we're going to have to listen to what parents have experienced. You know, beyond anything, we've been talking about parents being our kids' first educators. In the past year, if you've got a kid in K through 6, parents are the facilitators of education. Let's get real about this. I was lucky. Here in Massachusetts, we were only getting 1.5 hours of direct live instruction via Zoom. We had to fight to get 4 hours of live instruction because we weren't even having that. So you want to talk about facilitation. If you're going to give my second grader 4 hours of independent work, how do you think that is happening? That is a parent making sure that that's happening. And all of our national surveys, when you ask parents how much time they are spending facilitating education that is remote right now, it is just as much as they're getting live instruction with a teacher. So we have a lot of information. We have a lot of data. We have a lot of things that we've learned. We've got a lot of best practices that we've figured out. Another really important thing that I want you guys to hear that Lakeisha said, is that we have learned a lot of positive things. You know, having our kids in a system, again, that is based on white supremacy is not really great for a huge chunk of our children. This has been an important moment for parents to step up and create pandemic pods, or actually have some resources so that they can create pandemic pods. Back, you know, resource sharing and being able to come together to get this thing done for our kids. This is not something that was just created by, you know, a group of white folks that got their story told in the New York Times. Resource sharing and coming up with solutions is something that poor Black and brown folks have done for a very long time. And through that, and because organizations like mine, we gave away about $1 million in direct funding to parent organizations and just plain old parents developing these resource centers and pandemic pods, have been able to come up with a lot of incredible ideas. Having culturally infused, culturally responsive pandemic pods where kids are learning in a safe place. They're learning a culturally relevant curriculum. They're learning from Black and brown teachers. I can tell you, my baby, my second grader, went to Sharif El-Meki's Center for Black Educator Development's Literacy Academy, the Freedom School. He went there for 6 weeks. He went up 5 reading levels, the first time he had ever had a Black or brown teacher ever. So these are things that we are learning. These are best practices that we should be adopting. And parents want to speak up and be heard about the information we had about what is best for our kids. So making sure that these parents are close to the power on the national level, that they can speak their truth, they can talk about what's worked, what hasn't worked. And if we're really in this moment having a once in a generation opportunity to transform education, because everything that we were told was impossible is now possible, parents have to have a seat at that table because we have a lot to share.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And I'm hearing lots in the chat about positive narrative, and we are learning the same thing at Strive Together about the positive that is coming out of families and young people and getting education in their homes. So there is the both and narrative, and we do need to get both of those out. Thank you for sharing. Alex, curious to hear your perspective. You have a little bit of a different seat and view, and I wanted to make sure that you have that point of view.
Great, thank you. And it is always interesting to be on a panel where everyone else in this panel is a true leader of this work. I'm in philanthropy. Take that for what you will. But one of the things I've tried to understand in philanthropy is why aren't we funding more of this work? And where I've arrived, and it's an ongoing journey of learning and unlearning, is that I think education philanthropy and a lot of education reform has sort of this fundamentally flawed theory of change. And it's a theory of change I call Field of Dreams as theory of change, in homage to the movie quote and James Earl Jones saying, you know, if you build it, they will come. And I think you have people who are righteous and they start getting results in an education program. And if they're righteous and they're getting results, they think that's all it takes to have everyone follow them into the field and replicate what they do. And it keeps not working. And it keeps not working because that Field of Dreams as a theory of change has 2 fundamental flaws. Flaw number 1, it presumes that education systems are rational when they are in fact political. They are a complex web of money, power, interest, and values. And if the change you want to make to advance education equity is going to disrupt the status quo of money, power, interest, or values, the status quo is very good at organizing to preserve itself. The second flaw is the people so often leading that work are not respectful or representative of the communities they want to serve. It is so often well-intentioned outsiders who mostly look like me, coming up with solutions and imposing them on communities, and in doing so, disenfranchising them in the very same way that failing education systems do. And I do think we need to wrestle with that. And so I've sort of come to realize that we will never achieve the level of systemic change we want in education unless we're willing to be unapologetic about systems change, which is therefore unapologetic about power. And 2, we will never see that power properly deployed at scale unless we respect that we have been biased towards parents whose innate power it is. And I absolutely agree with Carrie. I don't love the word empowerment. I'm not like doctrinaire about it, but people have power. We don't empower them. I think we can support them, but we don't empower them. They have power. And so I think in education reform, education philanthropy, existing education systems, I think we need to reflect on our mindset and our biases, so we can then change our relationship with communities and parents, including our comfort and relationship around power, so then they can exercise that power to drive change in policy and practice and resource flows. And I think those are sort of the big elements of systems change, borrowing from FSG that's got a great sort of model on that. And that mindset piece starts with an acknowledgement that, to Carrie's point, a lot of education, philanthropy, and reform manifests as well-intentioned white outside missionary work. We come up with solutions, we impose them on communities. It doesn't matter the intent if we actually look at the impact. And I think that we have to acknowledge that. I think we have to acknowledge that that happens because of implicit and explicit bias around parents and communities that we purport to serve. And so I think we have to acknowledge that we need to change our mindsets about that. We need to acknowledge that communities are going to want to exercise their power, and we need to understand where that means we need to relinquish and step back from some of our power. Although, as one leader who's appeared to Carrie and Amy and Lakeisha and Seth have said to me, look, Alex, stepping back doesn't mean you don't still step up. But how we step up and where we step up becomes really crucial, because the single biggest thing well-intentioned outsiders with resources need to give up control over and relinquish their power over is controlling the agenda. That is what communities should be setting for themselves. And it's been a hard road for me to come to articulate this, but I've come to realize that when you impose an agenda on someone, that is a form of oppression. And I probably couldn't have articulated that a year ago, which, side note, makes me wonder what I'm not able to say right now that maybe I'll learn in a year. Because I do hear people go, oh yeah, we need to organize parents for X. And then and that organizing is whatever the agenda of that person who's speaking is. But if we truly want to be sincere about parents and communities charting their own course for themselves and their communities, then we need to understand it's going to be about their agenda, not our agenda. And we need to honor that. And at the end of the day, for philanthropy, what I've come to realize is this is not about how we invite parents to our table. It's actually what we do, including, to some points made earlier, recognizing the harm we've done in the past. But it's what we do to earn a trusted role, so communities invite us to their table so that we may be a partner in their agenda, which is hard work. It means interrogating a lot of programmed activities and mindsets we have, but it's the only way we're ever going to see systemic change happen, in my opinion. So it's what we as well-intentioned outsiders must do. And the way we do it is by learning from parents and communities and earning that role. And the first rule of organizing is listening without an agenda. And that's one of the first things we have to do. And it's about, acknowledging past pains, and it's about building relationships. And relationships can't be seen as the cost of doing business. Relationships are the business. And so we have a lot of work to do. And I will just finish. There was a question, I wasn't able to look at all the questions, but someone sort of asked, it sounded like they were asking, like, what do you do if you're in a district? I think it's the same thing for districts. Like, if you want parents to be your allies in driving change, they're hungry for it, but they haven't been invited to the table. Usually they're not even invited into the building. And parents will show up with pitchforks, and they should. They will also show up with shovels to build with people, but they will not show up with shovels to build on your agenda. They will show up with shovels to build with you and give you political capital if it's an agenda that you've let them create for themselves.
Thank you so much for that. Love the learning stance. And I think all of us are in that space, right? What we know today is what we probably didn't know yesterday, and we will continue to learn. But the idea is to stay open and figure out how to, I loved how you said step back, and that does not mean not stepping up. So thank you for that. We have a lot of great questions coming up, and I know we are about 20 minutes from the end of conversation. So I'm going to start picking some, and Yoli would love your help if I am missing some questions. This one applies to everybody. Nora asks, some people have said that the pandemic is an opportunity to reimagine schooling, all of it, including the role of parents. Do you believe this is possible? What would the process look like? What would you eliminate? And what new process and learning would you like to see?
Well, I can step up from a data perspective and tell you we are now, I think, on our 15th or 16th national survey of parents, where every single month we are asking parents questions like this. Like, is this an opportunity? Do you want your kids back in the box? Do you want your kids back into the status quo? Do you want to reimagine? What does reimagining look like? And if you go to our website, which is nationalparentsunion.org, you can see all of that survey data, all that information. I encourage you to look at it, dig into it. I think our survey is pretty innovative because it's actually created by parents. It was not cooked up by any, fancy folks around a glass conference room table. Like, this is parent led, the people who are closest to the ground saying, this is what I'm seeing, this is what we need to ask. All of that to say, by a 2-to-1 margin and growing, parents across the country are saying this is the moment to reimagine education. This is the moment where we want to see options. We have seen the promised land, and there's no putting toothpaste back, in this tube. We have seen that all of the options that we were told were impossible. Oh, you want virtual learning? You think your child learns differently? You think your child learns better in this setting? That's impossible. We can't do it. This is all we have to offer you. Well, necessity is the mother of invention. And here we are, we have had to reimagine everything. And all of a sudden we also have this stance that, only parents and families are the ones who are best equipped to make the choice as to what's right for their own child. Those of us who are here in this fight for education justice are here to tell you that we have always been best situated to make those decisions. But I will tell you, if we do not take this moment to innovate, to reimagine, to listen to parents, ask us questions. I feel like sometimes I'm giving folks human being lessons when I say this, but just because you're poor, black, and brown doesn't mean you're stupid. You can talk to us. Do not be afraid of us. Engage us in conversation. Don't use gatekeeping language, and say to us, what are you looking for? What are the outcomes that you seek for your children? And let's plan backwards from there, how to get them there. But engage us in a conversation about where we want our children to be. Engage our children in a conversation about where they want to be. Don't just do things to us. Do things with us. It's about co-creation and collaboration. And again, like we keep saying to you, if you bring us in to the table, don't just ask us, what ingredients do you want in a cake? Ask us even before that point. Ask us, should we be baking a cake? Should we be making a pie? What are we doing here? And we will help you every step of the way. We will walk with you. We will fight for you. We will make politicians do things for you. We will create that space, but put some respect on it. You need to engage us like human beings. Don't just, we don't need your empathy, your sympathy, your pity. We need your help and support, and we'll be willing to do the same for you. But it's got to be a relationship that is based in respect. And fundamentally, I think this reimagination is possible if we start the conversation there.
Thank you, Carrie. Anybody else would like to add? Sorry, Lakeisha, go on.
You just restate the question just so I make sure I answer it right. I wrote some notes, but I want to make sure I hit it.
Yeah, so it has scrolled up, but from my memory, everybody is talking about how pandemic is an opportunity to redefine education and parent power. And the question is around how do we make sure that, what are the things that we can implement going forward, and, what would that look like? I hope I did justice to rewording the question.
Yeah, and I agree with a lot, I agree with what Carrie has said in terms of like how we listen to parents, but I want to add that like we've listened to parents and we built a solution. So part of what I'm gonna put out there is replicate the things that are actually working, because whether we are a local organization on a national move, right? I'm on conversations with folks all the time across the country who are having the same issues, Black and brown communities in cities all across this country that are trying to solve for the same things we're trying to solve for Oakland, California, right? I think that's a huge piece. And I think another piece that's important around this is how do we create, right? I would put a question out there with folks is like, when the whole pandemic pod thing came out, and we had already launched and ran the first phase of our hub when the pandemic pod stuff popped up, sort of like towards the end of the summer. And, you know, there was a lot of stress and anxiety around, oh my God, this is going to create more of an equity gap and things in this nature. And then isn't this bad or whatever? And I would tell you, nothing is bad when parents take control of their own kids' education. The question is how do you make sure Black and brown families are able to do the same? You want to change a system, you give the power, you make sure that the folks who've had the least power will fuel the revenue of the system. Our urban systems cannot survive on white privileged families, okay? They survive on the families who tend to be the least knowledgeable and the least informed on how to change it. What the hub is doing, we have run leadership development and direct programming for our families for the past 5 years, okay? And I think we've done great work. I have not seen anything as transformative around bringing a sort of what we call bourgeoisie or bouginess to our families around what they deserve, as I've seen with the hub. Our parents are getting so much through what we've actually created that they're like, they're looking sideways and saying like, if you can't give me art classes at 11 o'clock, if you can't do this, I don't want it. And so the question I put in front of you is, what does it look like to create an infrastructure for Black and brown families that look like what white families are creating for themselves right now, right? White privileged families they believe that they have the agency and ownership over their kids' education. So when stuff happens, they move, they create pods. They don't want pods, they go say, let's go back to school. And I don't have any issue with it. The thing is that what does it look like for that to be the same power that Black and brown families feel? That they feel so empowered and liberated that they have ownership about their kids' education, that you give them a pathway to that. That pathway does not exist right now. We do not currently, I believe, have a systemic pathway for Black and brown families to have full liberation and control over their education. Black and brown families are continuously fed solutions. Oh, you got a bad traditional school? We're gonna give you this other kind of school, right? But then when something goes wrong, our families are back helpless and hopeless because they've been fed solutions. They've never been taught how to fish and create their own solutions. This is the moment, because like Carrie said, because our families at home, because they had to step up in such a huge, significant way, we are like at this critical moment. Call it reimagine, call it whatever you want to call it, but our parents have never been more at the table around their kids' education as they are right now. And now they're able to say, we don't want back to normal. But I don't know if people are innovative, creative, and radical enough to figure out what we walking into. I know the Oakland Reach is, I know the Oakland Reach has, but I will put this out there. What are we creating when families are not fed solutions? They're actually taught how to fish and create their own solutions. That is what the hub is about, right? That is what the hub is about. So I sit on a lot of panels and I hear a lot of people talking, but we don't want to let go because, you know, this is a hustle for bodies. You need my baby in that seat to get that money, right? But what if you let that go and just strictly thought about my child? Then what would you design? What would you create of? You can't create solutions holding on to on my ankle. You're trying to anchor these families into a system that hasn't failed us. Let it go, let us go, right? And really come to the table. I think there are smart people like that, but I think that there's a hustle and a hold on Black and brown families, okay, that we do not want to relinquish so that we can truly be free and truly be liberated. I see the hub as that model. We built that for us. Our parents are happy. They're saying they're getting more from 3 to 5 than they're getting during their 9 to 3. And our job right now is to make sure that our families are not being punished for having bad 9 to 3 experiences by making them go to school more from 3 to 5, right? Because you know you don't need that much live instruction to actually be academically prepared. So we have to move to a system and a model where our families can get the best of the best. They're really at the table when it comes to design and leading. And I'm talking about really leading. And most people don't even know what that looks like. That's why they need to either call me or they need to call Carrie. We can tell you what it looked like, and then you're gonna get a little scared, like you're gonna like regurgitate in your mouth, okay? But it's a thing that you have not seen yet, right? But that is the clear way. And we got about 18 months. I'm just putting some parameters around this. We got a real short timeline to make this happen. but our parents are ripe and they are ready. And in Oakland, we're going to make sure that our families do not have to turn back to an abusive system, right, that has cared very little about whether or not our babies read and care much about Lakeisha Young's 3 kids, how much money we getting for these 3. I want you in these seats. Whether they learn, that's secondary, third, fourth on the list. I need to make sure these babies is in these seats, right? That's it. And that's what we're dealing with. I know that was a lot, but this panel for some reason has inspired me around a church moment that I just felt like I need to share.
I'm so glad you did.
Super helpful. Go ahead, Yoli.
Well, first, I just want to acknowledge there's a poll in front of everybody's screen. As we're going through the Q&A, we just want to invite everybody to give us your feedback. We pay a lot of attention to responding to you and whether we've met your needs and how well we're doing. Ritika, I wonder if I could actually pick up on a question, and it's for Alex. And it comes from our colleague, Ginger Young. She's a Campaign for Grade Level Reading lead in Durham, North Carolina. And Alex, she's wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your assessment of why the power bases never seem to shift. The status quo is working exactly as it is intended, and many of you talked about that already. So how can we implore, motivate those who control the resources, i.e. philanthropy, but I would say also school systems, to shake up the systems with the redirection of their resources and see the power? In other words, how do we make this real?
Yeah. I mean, I think, and several people alluded before, I think we have to start by acknowledging we are trying to take on systems that have had multi-generational structures of systemic disenfranchisement and white supremacy. So it's like, not like this has been a recent problem. These systems have existed for a long time, and they have been very deliberate in who they have disenfranchised. I think from a philanthropic side, so I was talking to another philanthropist who read the essay, and I asked him, where are you spending your money? So I spend 90% on charters and districts and 10% on some organizing. I was like, well, what if you switch that? What if you spent 90% on organizing, if not 100%, so that you built and contributed to parents and communities building their own infrastructure of power to drive change? I mean, it's a $400 million a year spend in a school district. And the person said, well, but what if they don't do what's on our agenda? I said, well, one, you might be surprised your agenda is probably not that unaligned with them. But on the off chance your agenda is unaligned with the community you purport to serve, that's a pretty big friggin' problem you have. And so you need to be comfortable that actually they're going to pursue their agenda. And let's be fair, it's their community, shouldn't they? Like, how would you feel if your agenda was imposed on someone? And I'm finding we have to work out those mindsets. But part of it is that some people can be enlightened and understand they need to step back and relinquish power and make space for the people who should have it. But in a lot of the time, that doesn't happen. And so power has to be a struggle that's taken. And just very quickly, I'm researching an article about a town in Israel where the parents went on strike. And and I interviewed the head of the school system and the head of elementary school. And they said, well, we told our schools to treat kids like they were orphans because, we didn't know what our parents could do. So we had just told the schools, assume parents can't do anything. Well, what kind of relationship do you have with parents when that's what you're telling your teachers? So when COVID happened, schools shut down. And then when they tried to reopen in May, parents went on strike in this town. 80% of kids in Israel went back to school. This town started at 40% and went down to 10%. And I interviewed a school leader who said, this is on me. I got no kids in the building. Lakeisha, to your point, they had no kids in the building. Why? Because parents were down the street telling other parents, don't send your kids back. Parents picked up their pitchforks and they went on strike and they exercised their power. But then it was interesting. A set of schools said, all right, we've got to change our ways. So they went out and started talking to parents and said, what do we need to do? What do we need to do differently in order to earn you back? And the parents said, this is what we need you to do. And the schools did it. And when they did, the parents put down their pitchforks and they picked up their shovels and they built with the school. But that school will never go back, or I hope it won't, to its configuration of power. Like, the school leaders there now understand parents have power and they need to respect it. They need to embrace it. And I asked one school leader, like, do you feel less power? And she said, actually, I feel like I have more power because now I'm aligned with parents and people want to come to my school. They're knocking on the door. I have more power because I've actually gotten behind what parents want. And, I want to tell the story because I hope a whole bunch of parents in some communities, figure out how to create independent systems. They shouldn't have to. That's not just. But to Lakeisha's point, it may be necessary. But if you're in a failing school system and it's not going to be responsive to you, like, and it's basically abandoned you for the last year, it's real interesting to think about this transfer of power that's happening because of COVID from systems to parents. And by the way, systems are going to want that power back. They are not going to release it easily. And that's why the work Carrie does and Seth and Amy, Lakeisha are so important, because they're helping parents realize I have power. We're going to organize because collectively we've got more power than we do individually. And we're going to build our infrastructure of power to take on the system. And I hope systems, they should be respecting that all along. I think if they're successful, systems will have no choice but to respect it.
Thank you. Yuri, I'm wondering if we have time for one more question. So it's a version of, and all of you can answer, Seth and Amy, wonder if you have a point of view on this. But Alejandro says, how can we work with districts and move the change forward within cultures of inertia and valuing status quo of fake listening? And just wondering if you can share like how you have led that forward and what have you learned?
That was for Seth.
I think any panelist can answer, but I was trying to get voice for Seth and Amy in if they would like to.
Yeah, I mean, I think power exists in every interaction that systems have with families and children, and you can choose any one of those to interrogate and reflect honestly how people within the system exert their power and what it would look like to make sure that parents can exert their power. I mean, again, it exists. I often think about the tremendous power that the school secretary has in the life of children. Like we do a lot of enrollment work. We have lots of families who get their children into a magnet school and go to drop off the form, and a school secretary says, "Oh, this isn't the right school for your child. Children like yours just shouldn't go here." And the system very rarely, I mean, we all know that anecdotally, right? Like if you've spent any time around schools, you know that. But the system doesn't really interrogate that moment. It doesn't interrogate parent-teacher conferences. It doesn't interrogate the information that's shared with families. And I think one thing we've seen laid bare by the last year is the degree to which school systems expect the role of parents only to be send your kids to school and let us do our job. And I think to what Lakeisha and Carrie shared, it's not even always let us do our job, but let us collect the funding for your child. I try not to get too angry about Facebook memes, but the meme that really made me lose my mind early in the pandemic was the one floating around that said, "Parents relax, teachers' superpower is catching kids up, we got this." I think it's insane to ask parents to rely on someone else's superpower, because superheroes don't actually exist in real life. And so even when you think about actually sharing information with families about where their children are, and what a real plan is and what they can do if you're not following that plan. I think the point of giving up some of the money that schools are taking that's meant for COVID relief and then taking 50% off the top before a dime of it is used for kids, and thinking about organizations like REACH and National Parents Union and others who can put 90% of that money to work for families and are already listening to families and have different relationships with families. I mean, all of those things, there's tremendous power in systems. And I think it's interrogating where you have power and choosing to give some of those up and trusting that families love their kids and they're going to make good decisions for them.
Thank you, Seth.
I'm looking at the Q&A, and so I do see like 10 questions. I'm not trying to take anybody's place. I'm just trying to be responsive to the audience. So I did see a bunch of questions related to the hub and thought I could respond to those, just so that I can also put my email in there, but you understand just the efficiency of time. So I just want to name that.
I was just going to say that there are more questions than we have time. We have a minute left, and so wanted to offer a couple of options. So if you would be willing to share your information and folks could reach out, or if the campaign might be able to consolidate the questions and share those with the panelists, and people could share back the answers for 2 options, and wondering, Yoli, what works for you, and Lakeisha, if that might be a good option.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was going to jump in knowing we have a minute. One is to invite people who didn't get their question answered to connect directly with each of the presenters who might answer that question. We provided a lot of information, including people's bios, their social media handles, their websites. But in addition to that, given the request, I will make sure that we synthesize the questions that didn't get answered and share them with the panel and encourage some responses that we can then post and share with those that registered. So I'm happy to do that. It's been an incredibly robust conversation. I'll close out in a minute, but let me hand it to you first to close out, Ritika, and then I'll do my final thank yous.
Yes, I want to thank the panel. It really has been an outstanding learning conversation. I have learned personally a lot, and thank you for all the work you're leading. And thank you to the audience, and thanks to the campaign for inviting me. Appreciate it, Yoli, and back to you.
Great, thank you. Well, let me just share that a moment ago, Sierra, who does all the back end tech work to make the magic happen on this Zoom learning conversation, sent me the results of the poll. And she said, I have never seen responses this high for the strongly agree that this was an amazing conversation. So it doesn't surprise me. I knew that when we asked each of you to be part of this panel, that you would exceed our expectations. You are all people that the campaign admires, that we've been listening to, learning from, and then to finally bring you together on this conversation. And in the work that I lead on parents, it's been an honor and a privilege to have you share your work, your inspiration, and your charge. And more importantly, the examples of the work on the ground. I saw in the chat a lot of our community saying, this is great, how do we learn more? So maybe the downside of having you all is that you might get bombarded by the 300 communities in the campaign, but that would be good news. So with that, just feel my gratitude, Ritika, for an amazing moderating experience, and to each of you, Amy, Alex, Carrie, Seth, Keisha, really, really grateful for the time that you spent with us and the learning. So with that, we're at the end of our time. I just want to call attention to our upcoming webinars that Sierra shared early. Next week, we continue the conversation on parents. And we'll have a focus on community schools the following week. March 9th, we have a peer-to-peer learning session with Lehigh Valley around building a community of readers, and then a rapid response conversation around state strategies to implement high dosage tutoring. So we invite you to come back on all of the Tuesdays ahead of us. Thank you, and have a great and safe day to all of you. Take good care.